From the nation's capital, Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. A weekly discussion about the federal issues most important to Nevada. And now, from Washington, D.C., here's Marilee Joyce.
Good day to you. I'm Marilee Joyce. This is Eye on Washington, the only statewide Nevada news program produced in Washington, D.C. Every week, Eye on Washington takes you straight to Capitol Hill for a discussion with Nevada's delegation and other leaders about the federal matters that matter to you. Today's topic, smaller government, stronger economy. We'll tell you what one Nevada leader says government needs to do and not do to strengthen the economy of Nevada and this nation. And he is my guest today again, Senator Dean Heller.
And thank you.
Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, he says your job is his job one, and a stable business environment is his business. And today on Eye on Washington, we'll tell you what Senator Heller says must happen for businesses to feel confident enough to create those desperately needed jobs. We'll tell you his idea for reestablishing a housing market with long-term stability. And we'll tell you what he says is required to rein in Congress's out-of-control spending. While the number of Nevadans counted among the unemployed has declined in the last year, the state continues to have the most distressed economy in the nation, hanging on to that unenviable first place for unemployment. Only about 2 in 5 are able to find work, and that's folks still in the hunt. Many have dropped out of the labor force. Now, our Senator Heller says the key to getting you back to work starts with making business owners feel secure. He says they need certainty and confidence to hire you. And to give them that confidence to both thrive and create jobs, he says Congress needs to focus on long-term policies, starting with keeping taxes low and promoting pro-growth policies. Last summer, when one of the monthly Labor Department's national unemployment reports presented more bad news for Nevada, Senator Heller said a version of what he said the past few years. He said, quote, "My number one priority in the Senate is to turn our economy around and get Nevadans back to work." And Senator, you have a lot of ideas for doing that, as well as for dealing with the ongoing foreclosure crisis, which we're going to get to in our next segment. But regarding jobs, you know, you've called job creation your top priority. And, you know, time and again, you said the only way we're really going to see that improve long term is for Congress to understand that overtaxed and underconfident businesses are not going to hire people.
One of the statistics that I find interesting is that every time we create a new job here in the federal government, if you take a look at the last couple of years, the size of this federal government has grown almost person to person. We have lost as many jobs as the federal government has grown in jobs. And I think there's an interesting relationship there that every time you create a job in the federal government back here in Washington, D.C., you actually lose a job in Nevada. And I think it's just, I think it's an overview of how big this government is getting. And as you said, the amount of uncertainty that's out there right now, the amount of uncertainty that's out there. I talk to businessmen every day. And their question to me is, why would I hire someone today if I don't know what they're going to cost me tomorrow? And all we talk about back here in Washington, D.C. is raising taxes. It's all we talk about. It's an insatiable appetite to grow the government and to raise taxes. And if you're a small businessman today, which, by the way, does create 80% of the jobs here in this country, and if you take the jobs that have been created since 2000, 80% of the jobs in this country has been created by small businesses. And yet we have a federal government that continues talking about increasing their size and increasing taxes. And small businessmen right now are saying, wait, hang on. Well, we can't handle this right now in this economy.
Speaking of things of big size, you were no fan of the stimulus bill, and you know, you said near the top of the economy section of your website, you say that while it was supposed to provide a big jolt to the economy, instead the nation experienced more than 20 straight months of job loss after its passage.
Yeah, since the passage of the stimulus, Nevada lost 30,000 jobs. Keep in mind, for $1 trillion, if you spend $1 trillion, that is 20,000 private sector jobs at $50,000 apiece. Every time the federal government spends $1 trillion, we could create 20,000 private sector jobs at $50,000 apiece. We are sucking this money out of the private sector and putting it into the federal government for temporary jobs. The key, and you've talked about this, the key to all this is we need to create jobs. We can solve a lot of problems here in this country. You want to talk about foreclosures, you want to talk about bankruptcies, you want to talk about the obviously lack of jobs here. Creating jobs solves a lot of problems in this country, and that's where we ought to be keeping our eye on that ball to turn this economy around and to create the jobs necessary. And
let's shift this business of focus just a tiny bit. You know, what about the difficulty more and more of just being in business in the first place? You've said, you know, do both to the rough economy and the uncertainty of what's coming from Washington regarding taxes, regarding health care.
Wall Street Journal recently had an article that says today the burden of regulation now outstrips the burden of taxation. You take OSHA, you take the EPA, you take BLM, you take Forest Service, regardless of what the industry is in the state of Nevada, from gaming to mining to agriculture, go down the list, and the EPA, OSHA, BLM, Forest Service, all of them. The burden is so great. Mm-hmm. I know on your show in the past we've talked about how long it takes to get a permit to mine. 10 years. 10 years. You can go to Chile or China, get it in a couple of years. Why can't we create jobs in this country by stripping away some of these regulations, onerous regulations, that continue to grow? I mean, we're adding thousands of pages a month through the amount of regulations that these small businesses have to deal with. So as you talk about businesses struggling, you know, it's a toss-up right now. What's more burdensome, their level of taxation or the level of regulations that they have to deal with every day, and the new ones that are coming down the pipe every day? You
go home to Nevada just about every weekend. What do you hear from small business leaders there about both what your role as a federal leader is, what the congressional role is to make things easier for them to hire and to take some of these burdens off their back? Do you specifically hear some things like these regulations are
Oh, sure. You know, the sand and gravel people were in my office a couple months ago, and you know there were probably 60 to 80 of them in there, and you know, you just have people camped outside their pits now, waiting for a flume of dust to go up in the air so that this 27-year-old kid can run over and hand him another, another $15,000 fine. I mean, don't they have better things to do? And frankly, the question is does government work for us, or do we work for the government? And at this point, there's a real confusion out there. And that's what's troubling to these small businesses. Stop talking about tax increases. Stop talking about increasing regulations through, regardless of what it is, through energy policies or healthcare policies or whatever. They're just putting more and more burden. And get these regulators off their back every day. Every day, they're right looking over their shoulders, and it's very, very difficult. Whereas they're doing the same job they were doing 10 years ago, but they used to work with them, not against them. And so that seems to be the real frustration right now.
All right, thanks for that. And we're going to talk about something else that's very difficult you're dealing with, and that's the foreclosure crisis that continues in Nevada and elsewhere, and that's right after this.
You're watching Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. Brought to you by the National Mining Association, the Frias Companies, Caesars Entertainment, NV Energy, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, Western Lithium Corporation, and Skyline Restaurant and Casino.
America's minerals have made us a nation of self-reliant dreamers, shaping our world and the endless ways we enjoy it. But red tape often forces us to import more than half the minerals we depend on. Minerals we already have. We don't import our dreams. Shouldn't that go for our minerals too? The National Mining Association. Learn more at nma.org.
You already watch Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce, Nevada's only statewide program produced in Washington, D.C. But for even more news from Capitol Hill that affects you, your family, and your business, you need to read Nevada's Washington Watch, our online newsletter. In-depth reporting on federal efforts that impact you. Our exclusive Inside the Beltway column, putting a microscope on Nevada's congressional delegation. Guest editorials about what Nevada needs from the Hill. Nevada's Washington Watch, your watch on Washington. Subscribe today at nevadaswashingtonwatch.com.
Heads we go, tails we stay. A coin flip. That's how it all began for what is now Nevada's largest transportation provider. Charlie Frias, with a can-do spirit and support of his loving wife Phyllis, bought ABC Union Cab in 1966. They then parlayed 5 cabs into a fleet of nearly 1,000. And today, Frias has over 2,000 employees and was recently voted Las Vegas's best company to work for. Frias, safe, reliable, simply the best.
When it comes to state-of-the-art energy, Nevada is the right state to be in. A reliable, efficient network. Cleaner energy resources like solar, wind, and geothermal. And technology that will help you save energy and money at home. Learn more at nvenergy.com.
And welcome back to Eye on Washington, our discussion of Nevada and the nation's economy and my guest's ideas for improving both. And he is my guest today, Nevada U.S. Senator Dean Heller. Did you know that one foreclosure can reduce nearby property values and home equity by as much as $220,000? No kidding. The Center for Responsible Lending estimates that roughly 1 in 3 households will see their property values drop by $5,000 on average, and a foreclosure lowers the price of neighboring properties by an average of 0.9%. And some more bad news for places like Nevada that are experiencing sky-high foreclosure rates. The center says homes in foreclosure strain local governments too, because they often become sites for crime and other neighborhood problems. Just one foreclosure can pose up to $34,000 in direct costs on local government agencies, including inspections, court actions, police and fire department efforts, potential demolition, unpaid water and sewage, and trash removal. Now, as you are undoubtedly aware, Nevada has for far too long led the nation in foreclosures, and my guest says it again and again, like in the unemployed crisis, the answer, it's stability. He says government must look to the long term, must reestablish a housing market that has long-term stability in which private capital and not the federal government is the primary source of mortgage lending. And Senator, you've said that that's what has to happen. And one example I've heard you mention is the necessity of making further reforms to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Tell us what you want to see there.
Well, first of all, I want you to know I lose sleep over this topic. I think about this every day. There are literally thousands of Nevadans today that are trapped in their homes. And it's very frustrating, it's very difficult, and I know a lot of Nevadans are struggling right now over this particular issue. You know, some of the statistics, and you just mentioned some of them, but think about it, 70% of the homes in Nevada are underwater right now. 70% of the homes, and these are people that perhaps have lost their job and they can't. They'd like to move around to find jobs, but they can't because they're trapped inside their homes. I'll tell you a story about Geithner came in front of Ways and Means, and I told Geithner I talk to these homeowners every day. Every day I'm in conversations with these homeowners, and they're upset with their banks. And I understand that. I don't defend banks. I think banks need to do more work and work harder to try to help some of these people out with their loans. But when you talk to the bank blames the FDIC. And they're saying, hey, they're telling us to clean up our books. We're stuck between a rock and a hard spot. You have the president out there telling us to loan money, and then you have the FDIC coming in telling us, clean up your books, and this is what you have to do or we're going to shut you down. So they're trying to deal with the regulators. At the same time, myself and a lot of Americans are telling them to help these homeowners out. And then when you talk to the FDIC, the FDIC blames Geithner.
So what's the answer?
So I said to Geithner, it's on your shoulders. This is where the buck stops. What are you going to do about Nevada? I mean, if Nevada has the problem, banking's part of the problem, FDIC's part of the problem, FDIC says you're the problem, what are you going to do for the state of Nevada? And he didn't have an answer. But I'll tell you what the answer is, and the answer is turning this economy around and creating jobs. If you turn this economy around and it starts moving forward, it'll start raising the value of these homes. Get some of these homes that are underwater. Let's start moving them up. But keep in mind, you know, a home 5 years ago is worth somewhere between a third and a half the value that it was worth 5 years ago. So how far does this economy have to go? Some economists are saying you're going to have to wait 10, 20 years. 10 to 20 years before you're going to see the value of your home come back so that you at least break even. So I just want you to be aware of this. I talk to homeowners every day. I lose sleep over this, and I know that the answer is turning this economy around and creating jobs. And you can't do that by expanding the size of this federal government, by raising taxes during very, very tough economic times.
Have any government attempts to help end foreclosures offered true relief? For example, that $8,000 home buyer tax credit for first buy first-time home buyers and the $6,500 tax credit for the move-up buyers, the repeat buyers?
I've supported those programs. We've had numerous programs, some that I haven't supported. We have literally spent hundreds of billions of dollars in this country, and we see that it impacts 4 or 5 homes in Nevada. I mean, clearly, how you can spend that kind of money and see a result that's so dismal. But the tax credits, if you actually look at the statistics the last couple of months, we're actually homes are changing hands quite rapidly. Most of the new purchases, of course, are by cash, by investors. Those are not the kind of people we want to get into these homes. We want a stable economy with stable families in these neighborhoods, and that's what's going to increase the value of the neighborhood in the long run.
You'd like to see a balanced budget amendment. Well, what's that? We're going to tell you right after this.
Every day, thousands of people in northern Nevada don't get enough to eat. 1 out of 5 children in Nevada go to bed hungry every night. But you can do something about it. Catholic Community Services of Northern Nevada has been providing help and creating hope in our community for more than 65 years. By donating food, time, or money, you can make a difference in a hungry person's life. When you make your generous donation to St. Vincent's Dining Room and St. Vincent's Food Pantry, you're helping to fight the scourge of hunger in northern Nevada. In these tough economic times, now more than ever, we need to help those less fortunate. To find out how you can donate to St. Vincent's Dining Room and St. Vincent's Food Pantry, call, click, or stop by, and together we can end hunger in northern Nevada.
Thanks to an ongoing commitment by America's mining companies, more than 2 million acres already have been reclaimed. To learn more about reclamation or other aspects of mining, visit nma.org, the National Mining Association.
You already watch Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce, Nevada's only statewide program produced in Washington, D.C. But for even more news from Capitol Hill that affects you, your family, and your business, you need to read Nevada's Washington Watch, our online newsletter. In-depth reporting on federal efforts that impact you. Our exclusive Inside the Beltway column, putting a microscope on Nevada's congressional delegation. Guest editorials about what Nevada needs from the Hill. Nevada's Washington Watch, your watch on Washington. Subscribe today at nevadaswashingtonwatch.com.
Heads we go, tails we stay. A coin flip. That's how it all began for what is now Nevada's largest transportation provider. Charlie Frias, with a can-do spirit and support of his loving wife Phyllis, bought ABC Union Cab in 1966. They then parlayed 5 cabs into a fleet of nearly 1,000. And today, Frias has over 2,000 employees and was recently voted Las Vegas's best company to work for. Frias, safe, reliable, simply the best.
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No, no, no.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
Welcome back to Eye on Washington, our discussion of what my guest says Congress must do if we are to see real long-term economic relief. We've been visiting with him today, of course, Nevada U.S. Senator Dean Heller. We must start making the difficult decisions necessary for the future of our country. That's what Senator Heller said last summer when he again voiced his support to schedule a vote on the balanced budget amendment. Although he was talking about a vote in the Senate at the time, the issue's been near and dear to him for years. In fact, a few years ago, when he was in the House, Senator Heller co-authored a balanced budget amendment to require our government to live within its means. There's a section of his website dedicated to this subject. He says there that curbing out-of-control spending spending and balancing the budget should be a top priority of Congress that's been on a massive spending spree. But he believes quite the opposite is happening. The senator says it's crucial that Americans understand the connection between the national debt and the strength of the dollar. On his website, he says, quote, "As our national debt grows, our dollar is weakened and Americans have to work more so we can buy less." Senator Heller was the only delegation member who voted against the stimulus bill. In addition, he's voted to set non-security budget allocation levels at 2008 levels, which is before the bailouts and stimulus spending were implemented. And Senator, we hear words like debt, deficit, congressional budget, and, you know, our eyes gloss over. But you said we need to understand what debts and deficit mean to our country's future.
Let's put it in perspective what America does. We raise $2.2 trillion in revenue every year, and we spend $3.7 trillion. So there is $1.5 trillion that we spent that we can't cover with our revenues. That would be like a family of four having a job that pays $50,000 a year and spending $70,000.
I'll read you your quote. Here's your quote. "Family and businesses across the country work within a budget. It's time the federal government did the same. I can't live outside my budget. I can, but I get in a lot of trouble really soon."
I would think the average Nevadan, average American, believes that this government needs to live within its means. That's why I vote against the stimulus. I mean, that $1.5 trillion that we overspend every year, why isn't that considered a stimulus? And if it is considered a stimulus, why hasn't this economy taken off? But they want stimuluses above the $1.5 trillion that we spend. And as I said earlier in your show, $1 trillion spent is 20,000 private sector jobs paying $50,000 a year. And we wonder why we're not creating jobs here in this country. We're sucking capital from the private sector and putting it into the federal government, and it's not working.
Is it because they don't have to care about that enormous overage, because they don't have a balanced budget amendment?
Well, sure. Like the state of Nevada. Take the state of Nevada. State of Nevada has to balance their budget every year. I think 49 out of 50 states have to balance their budget every year. Federal government doesn't have to do that. And the result is a weak dollar. We're going to see skyrocketing inflation. We're going to see an increase in interest rates. This is going to happen here in the near term. Every economist is saying if we don't get this budget under control, the fiscal damage is going to occur. And as we watch European economies, as we watch Greece and Spain and Italy and these countries that are in terrible shape, it's because their politicians were not willing to make tough choices. And in America, we're not willing to make tough choices. That's why we have $2.2 trillion in revenue and $3.7 trillion in expenditures, because the politicians in Washington, D.C. are not willing to close that gap.
Okay, we've got about a minute left in this segment. Tell us more about a balanced budget amendment and what it would do and why it's been a priority of yours.
Well, there's short-term fixes and there's long-term fixes. You can take a look at different budgets that are floating around, and to get to a balanced budget amendment is going to take some time. I mean, we put ourselves in this fiscal crisis over 50 years. It's going to take more than a couple of years to fix it, and I think that's what this balanced budget amendment is all about, giving a timeline. Let's just take the Republican budget as an example. If you have a 10-year-old daughter or granddaughter today, 10 years old, we will continue to borrow money until that little girl is 40 years old. That's a 30-year window of continued increases in deficits until we finally get to a balanced budget. The responsibility, I think, of those that are in charge here in Washington, D.C. is to see that the revenues and the expenditures come together and they match. If we don't do that, we're going to have some serious fiscal problems here in this country. And so that's what this provision is all about, that long term. We have short-term fixes, we're going to have long-term fixes. The long-term fix is a balanced budget amendment. Doesn't mean tomorrow, next year, we'd have to make some pretty severe cuts, but in the long term, it took us 50 years to get here. Let's see if we can fix this in 20 to 30 years to get to a balanced budget so that, of course, the economy can continue to grow.
We'll leave it there because it's a good place to stop, because in every segment, whatever the thing you've said, long-term stability is the answer. We're going to be right back with our mailbag.
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No, no, no.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
America's minerals have made us a nation of self-reliant dreamers, shaping our world and the endless ways we enjoy it. But red tape often forces us to import more than half the minerals we depend on. Minerals we already have. We don't import our dreams. Shouldn't that go for our minerals too? The National Mining Association. Learn more at nma.org.
You already watch Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce, Nevada's only statewide program produced in Washington, D.C. But for even more news from Capitol Hill that affects you, your family, and your business, you need to read Nevada's Washington Watch, our online newsletter. In-depth reporting on federal efforts that impact you. Our exclusive Inside the Beltway column, putting a microscope on Nevada's congressional delegation. Guest editorials about what Nevada needs from the Hill. Nevada's Washington Watch, your watch on Washington. Subscribe today at nevadaswashingtonwatch.com.
Built on a fleet of just 5 cabs bought in 1966 by founder Charlie Frias, Frias Transportation is now Nevada's largest transportation provider. Today, Frias has a fleet of nearly 1,000 vehicles and more than 2,000 employees. As an industry and community leader, Frias continues to create the future of transportation technology and management and actively supports the community, continuing the legacy of quality service in the Las Vegas Valley. Simply the best. Thanks to an ongoing commitment by America's mining companies, more than 2 million acres already have been reclaimed. To learn more about reclamation or other aspects of mining, visit nma.org, the National Mining Association.
And we're back with our closing segment of Eye on Washington. It is our mailbag segment. In this segment, we tell you about an issue the congressional mailbag page of Joyce Communications website has been getting a lot of correspondence about. We read one of your letters on the air, and then we invite our guests to respond to you right here. And Senator, your office has been hearing a lot from folks on our site about border control. And I have a letter here to you from Janet of Winnemucca, and Janet writes, "Dear Senator Heller, you mentioned the need for funding to protect our borders from illegal immigration. How much do you think instituting the border controls as you propose would cost, and where do you think that money would come from?" How do you respond to Janet?
Well, first of all, when I do teletown hall meetings, Marilee, and Janet has a great question, the questions that I'm asked the most on these teletown hall meetings, and I'll have 10,000 people on the line asking questions, will be jobs in the economy, gasoline prices, and border control issues. And my answer for the border control issues has always been pretty much the same, and that is we have to enforce the laws that we have. Enforce the laws that we have in the books. And that's the problem that states have today, is that the federal government is not enforcing federal laws on immigration.
She asked about cost. It sounds like you're saying that if we would follow the rules on the books, etc., the cost wouldn't be as much. You wouldn't have to do so much extra.
We've appropriated billions of dollars for the fence and for the security structure at this point. I don't think you'd need any additional dollars. All you need to have is to make sure that the enforcement does occur.
Sounds like Janet can count on you. Okay, thanks for being here today.
You.
You can send a letter to the Senator Heller or any member of the delegation. Just visit joycecommunications.com, and letters are edited for length. Don't go too long there. But while on the site, check out some other news on how federal issues affect you in Nevada. That is it for this week's Eye on Washington. Be sure to join us next time as we discuss more important federal matters and their impact on you in Nevada. I'm Marilee Joyce in Washington. Good day.